Hi, welcome to For Better For Verse, the podcast where a married couple, a theologian, and a philosopher are taking on the scriptures. I'm Justin Crisp.
I'm Jewelle Bickel, and today we are talking about Deuteronomy and Joshua.
So we are continuing our catch-up mission after many days of, no daycare for our toddler because there was snow on the ground, or no daycare for our toddler because we had viruses of various sorts. In any case, we are hoping to be completely caught up in two more podcasts.
Two more podcasts. We're so close. We're kind of so close.
This week, Deuteronomy and Joshua. Next week, Judges and Ruth.
And then we should be on track.
We'll be entering into the epic narrative of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, which is going to occupy us for quite some time.
Yes, I love 1st and 2nd Samuel, so it'll be fun.
Absolutely. The story of King David is getting underway. But first, we have to basically revisit everything that we have read and talked about so far, because it's all summarized by Moses in this farewell speech on the verge of the promised land, which he is not going to enter himself, as we said last time, because of his disobedience to God at Meribah, where he struck the rock angrily instead of simply commanding it with his voice to bring forth water for his people. Moses is not going to get to go into the promised land, and so he is giving his farewell address. He is empowering and charging his servant Joshua to be his successor, and he's trying to remind the people of Israel of everything that they have been through and of God's law and covenant with a particular purpose, which is that if they keep this law and they maintain their side of the covenant, life will go well with them. Joel, what do you make of Deuteronomy?
Oh, yes. Here's my recommendation. If you got lost somewhere in Exodus or Leviticus or Numbers, don't worry about it. Just read Deuteronomy and you'll get the whole story again.
It's true.
It took me a little bit as I was reading through it. I was like, what? We've already done this. Haven't we done? And then I realized, Moses is just narrating what happened. So that's my recommendation. If you got lost there, skip it. Just get through Deuteronomy and you'll know the whole story. Deuteronomy is very interesting because it's this big farewell speech from Moses, and sort of in the ancient times, there are quite a few different historical documents we have where they have these long speeches like this sort of thing. And he does set out to say, basically, here's a reminder of everything we've done. Here's every step. Here's every failure we've had. Here's every time God was faithful in spite of it. Here's every time I pleaded on your behalf. Yeah. He includes those as well. And here we are now. And you could forgive him for going through all of this again, because this is a new generation, remember?
Yeah.
These says at some point, right, these people that he's with, none of them came out of Egypt. Right. Or if they did, they were very young when they did, right? So they don't remember everything that happened. So they need to be reminded of what is going on and the rules. And so Deuteronomy is just this. It's their reminder. It says, here's our story. Here's who we are as a people. And here's why we're about to go enter this new land.
There are a number of things that are particular to the retelling of the story in Deuteronomy as opposed to in Exodus or Leviticus or Numbers. I like to think of Moses here as a character who is remembering selectively some things and making himself look a little better than he
has his moments.
Yeah. For example, when he's reminding the people why he can't go into the promised land, he blames them. He says, this is all your fault. It's because of your stiff-neckedness, your stubbornness, because of your rebellion against the Lord that I'm not able to go into the promised land. And that's only partly true.
Yeah.
It was their unruliness, their chaos, their stubbornness that drove him to lose his temper and strike the rock.
Right.
This is Burnout Moses from our last podcast, but that's only, and their stubbornness is only an indirect reason why he doesn't get to go into the promised land. Moses himself struck the rock and was disobedient to God. That's the particular reason from the book of Numbers why, but Moses is dressing it up a little bit. So he's emphasizing things for the new crowd, and he can't help but make himself look a little better at the same time.
Right, kind of tell it the way he remembers it. Yeah. As it were. And there is, as you said, there are some things that are different about Deuteronomy compared to Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And I think one of the other things is that when he's giving the rules this time, because he does go through and give the rules, these are not rules for people who are living in tents in the wilderness. These are rules for a community, for a nation.
For a civilization.
Yeah. On how to deal with each other, what their laws need to be, and I think that is a big difference that we find in Deuteronomy.
I think that's right. One of the things that Deuteronomy anticipates is, of course, the conquest of Canaan, the establishment of the nation of Israel. And part of the theology of Deuteronomy that's pretty obscure when you just read the book of Deuteronomy straight through
Mm-hmm.
without any knowledge of what's going to happen in the future in First and Second Samuel and then First and Second Kings in particular. But something to flag for everybody at home
Mm-hmm.
now is Deuteronomy wants to centralize worship and
Mm-hmm.
centralize all of the sacrifices which were set up in the Levitical system in one particular place. And Deuteronomy never names that
It
place.
doesn't say
Moses
where
in this
it's.
farewell speech doesn't name the place. He just says it is the place the Lord will choose for his name to dwell. God is going to say, this is where all of the worship is going to need to take place. And that's going to end up being Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point in the story, when Moses is talking to the people, they haven't gone into the promised land
So
yet.
they don't know where it's going to be yet. They just know there's going to be a place.
Exactly.
And it's not going to just happen randomly wherever everyone's at in their community. They'll have to come together for their sacrifices and worship.
People are going to get into trouble later on. This is why I want to flag it now. People are going to get into trouble later on with God for disobeying this particular feature of Deuteronomy's theology. They're going to try to perform sacrifices anywhere that they want to. And God has said, no. You have to do them in this central place in Jerusalem, in the temple, which we're going to see King Solomon build.
Right. Where I am at.
Where I am
literally where I'm locally at.
Because God's going to move from that tabernacle temple tent, which they've been carried around, and God is going to make his presence to dwell in a particular place.
Exactly. And so he wants sacrifices there with him.
Yeah.
Not just wherever you feel like it.
Yeah. And so that's one side of Deuteronomy's theology. The other that I think is of note is the purpose of the law. And I already gestured to this at the very beginning. So the purpose of Israel keeping its side of the covenant is so that life will go well with them. This language is all over the book of Deuteronomy. This is just one example from the end of chapter 5. You shall walk in all the way that the Lord your God has commanded you, says Moses, that you may live and that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land that you shall possess. And there are two things going on. There are two ways in which life will go well with you if you follow God's law and these commands. One is that, God has arranged the universe in wisdom, I think, according to the authors of this book. And God's commands are not simply arbitrary. They are designed for our health and well-being, for the well-being of this whole people and this whole civilization that's emerging. So when you follow them, your life is going to turn out well because that's, kind of the point of the law. Is God's trying to save you from false choices. But the other side is a theology of divine retribution, where if bad things happen to Israel, they are happening because God is punishing them. So we've already seen this theology in the books of Exodus and Numbers. I tried to talk about it as God letting the people have what they want.
Yeah.
But there is a more juridical, punitive, sort of tit for tat punishment theology that's running through Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy wants to say that the people are going to inherit the land and that the current occupants of the land, the Canaanites, are bad for various reasons, and that God is punishing them by making the people of Israel to conquer them. And there's a warning on Moses' part over and over again that if the people of Israel don't keep the covenant with God, God's going to make the exact same thing to happen to them after they're in the promised land and after they built their civilization. Moses actually straight up predicts this is going to happen.
He does. And near the end of his speech, he goes through and makes sort of blessings, like, if you follow God, here are all your blessings. If you don't, here are all the curses you're going to get.
Yep.
Right? He just goes through and lays them out. It's very interesting to read through all of this, right? And then keeping in mind that we're about to go into Joshua and then the history books with Samuel and Kings. So this same theology goes throughout it, right? God got mad, and so they were conquered by the Philistines. Like it'll say something like that, like 14 times in Judges, I think.
That's right.
It does seem that the authors are really sort of saying, God's happiness with us equals staying where we are, this land, and being successful. And God's displeasure is being removed from this land and being conquered.
Yep. And that's how this whole Deuteronomistic history that runs through the end of Second Kings is really going to work, as you're saying.
Yes, and that's what we're going to just keep reading over and over again. And I think that for a lot of us modern readers, I know myself included, it can feel kind of weird.
Yeah. I mean, I don't believe in that kind of a God, in part because I believe in the God of the Bible. And I should probably say, a word about.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, given that this God is
I
the
know.
God of retribution.
Yeah. I was well, this God's in the Bible. So what do you mean?
Yeah, I know. So I think that the human authors of the Bible are like unreliable narrators in a novel written by the divine author, who is God. One of my favorite novels is Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. I have no opinion about the movie. I haven't seen the movie. This is not why I'm bringing up Wuthering Heights. I love 19th century English literature, and I love the Bronte sisters. I think that Charlotte and Emily were some of the best Anglican theologians of the 19th century, but that's for another time. But in Wuthering Heights, you were dealing with all these unreliable narrators who are giving you the plot. You've got Nellie, the nurse, who tells you all of her opinions, and you've got Lockwood, who's telling you all of his opinions. You've got letters written by characters in the novel, which are, shown to the reader. None of these characters is completely reliable. They're often lying. They're often self-deceived. They are often trying to make themselves look better. They've got some kind of an agenda about somebody else. And you have to add up the sum total of their witnesses and make sense of them through interpretation as a reader in order to understand what is actually the truth of the fictional world that the author Emily Bronte is trying to to describe or create. And I think that the Bible works in much the same way, except God, the Holy Spirit, who inspires the writing of these human texts, I believe. God, the Holy Spirit, is Emily Bronte, and the individual human authors of these biblical books, including the book of Deuteronomy, are like the unreliable narrators. So the author of Deuteronomy and the subsequent Deuteronomistic history, they're giving us their witness. But at various, not only in the canon of the scriptures taken as a whole, not only are there other voices in the canon who contradict this kind of theology, but also you can see the theology of retribution of Deuteronomy coming, kind of cracking under its own pressure at various places. So there's a passage in chapter 9 where Moses reminds the people it is not because they are righteous that God is giving them the land, because the people have not been righteous.
Not been righteous
Not
at
even
all.
for a second.
No, they've been.
Not Abraham, not Isaac, not Jacob, not any of their descendants. Nobody's perfectly
as
righteous.
We've seen over and over again.
He says, do not say in your heart, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to possess this land, whereas it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart are you going in to possess the land, but because of the wickedness of these nations is the Lord your God driving them out from before you. That sounds like it's half of the theology of retribution. So it's not that Israel deserves to get the land, but it's that the people of Canaan deserve to lose the land. But it's an important it's an concession on Moses's part that he has to admit we're not good. We're not getting this land because we've been good, because we've lived our lives well. That's not the reason why.
Well, say he goes on right after that to say the Lord your God is dispossessing them of this land in order to fulfill a promise that he made. So it's not just like because he's displeased with them, but it's like he made this promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so that's why he's moving them off the land. So they may not have even be bad, possibly.
I actually think that's exactly right. I think that the author of Deuteronomy is trying desperately to shoehorn the facts of Israel's history. That is, the fact that they've been disobedient and unrighteous the whole time, and they will very soon be disobedient and unrighteous again after they possess the land. He's trying to shoehorn this into his theology of retribution, but he can't. And so he has to at least give lip service to the only reason why the people of Israel are being given this land, which is that God just wants to give it to them. God, to quote Robert Farrar Capon, God, for his own idiot reasons, wants to do this just because they're chosen. And in chapter 10, Deuteronomy, the author of Deuteronomy will say, the Lord set his heart in love upon your fathers. That's the only reason why.
That's it.
God
That's
just
really
irrationally, that's too strong. God, for God's own mysterious reasons, loves this recalcitrant people. That's really the only good
Stubborn
reason.
people. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's true, and I think we're going to talk about that again probably when we get to Joshua in just a couple of minutes. But before we get there, I wanted to talk about a couple more things in Deuteronomy, in particular, this sort of how to live as a civilization,
Mm, mhm.
and this way in which God is kind of caring for them in doing that. I don't know that I've ever read through all of Deuteronomy before, and so I don't
Mm.
think it's been quite so obvious for me to read. But God takes great care in telling them how to set things up. I
Yeah,
mean, we joked about Leviticus. It's like, here's what you do if your neighbor's donkey falls in a hole. Are you responsible or not? Right?
that's right.
Right. But this is a different kind of level because he because God in Deuteronomy sets up here's how you're going to live your civilization. And over again, he says, in order to make sure that you care for the widows, the orphans, and the foreigners who
Yeah.
live among you. So there's many things they do, right? So if you are harvesting your crops, you go through once. If there's some left behind, you leave it because you are leaving that for the widows, the orphans, and the foreigners. Or if, what is it, every third year when you take your tenth, your tithing, 10% of what you have to the temple
Mhm.
to worship.
The place where the Lord will choose to
The
make his
place,
name dwell,
yes, the place which
aka Jerusalem. They don't know.
Jerusalem, yeah, they don't know what it is. Every third year, you give that to the orphans and widows, in addition to the Levites
Mhm,
who would have it normally. And so, setting up with such care
mhm.
that this is a community, a nation that takes care of itself and takes care of all of the people, even the smallest and the weakest and the poorest among it.
That's so true. There are many places in Deuteronomy where,
Hmm.
even though I don't buy the theology of divine retribution as being consistent with God's revelation elsewhere in the scriptures or,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
not to mention in Jesus Christ, but there's a lot in Deuteronomy that I think does accord with what the divine author intends to communicate by means of the whole canon of scripture. And this
Absolutely.
is one of them. This
Right.
is God's care for what we might call social justice. Every 3 years, that's when they give the tithe to not just the Levites, but to the widows, the orphans, and the sojourners or immigrants.
Every seventh year is a remission of debts.
Absolutely. All the debts are forgiven. I
Every
mean,
7 years.
that's amazing.
That is
I mean,
incredible.
every 7 years, they also free all of the people they've enslaved. Uh,
Every 7 years. And if someone comes to them who runs away, who
mhm.
was enslaved and sort of is run away and is now free, you cannot return them.
Yeah, you can't send them
You
back to their
cannot send them
masters.
back to their
They're
masters.
free.
They're free
They
now and they
escape,
live
they
among
escape.
you. And that's what you have to do. So there's lots of moments, tiny little tweaks that God's making,
Mm.
which would be significant compared to many of these neighboring nations.
Well, it's completely astonishing. Nobody is saying that the nation Deuteronomy sets up is perfect. Certainly, it doesn't accord with, like, all of our modern values. Certainly, it doesn't even accord with, like, every value that you could have in the Iron Age. But compared to, what other nations are doing at the time, this stuff is revolutionary, and a lot of our modern values, I would say, actually come from this stuff is a down payment on things
It
like
is.
human rights, on things like the irreducible dignity of every human person.
Mm-hmm.
These beliefs that today undergird modern democracies, they are our common sense. We would have none of that if it were not for the beginnings of this attitude towards people as having dignity just because God says they have
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
dignity, just because God has created them in this way and says you ought to treat them in this way, just
Yes.
because they're human. I you know, Nobody, according to Deuteronomy, ought to live in conditions, material economic conditions that degrade them as human beings. Deuteronomy, I have a lot to say about justice and theories of justice. I've
He
bored you
does.
with this before. I'm tempted to go on a little diatribe about the difference between John Rawls's account of social justice and Robert Nozick's
He'd love
account
to
of
talk to you
social
about this
justice.
sometime.
I'm in the Nozick camp rather than the Rawls camp, and I actually think that Deuteronomy is too, but I won't go into that right now. But suffice it to say, Israel has a floor
It does.
set up in Deuteronomy under which Deuteronomy will not let anybody fall. Deuteronomy is fine with people having lots and lots of wealth.
It does. It doesn't. I mean, it says God's blessing you
Absolutely.
in these ways.
If you live well, life's going to go well, as I was saying. God's even going to give you prosperity. That's the theology of Deuteronomy. Lots of questions to be asked about that, which we talked about back
In
in
Genesis,
Genesis.
and I still have. We'll have some more, and don't worry, we'll get there eventually with Job.
God in Deuteronomy doesn't mind wealth, but God certainly minds degrading poverty. So there's a floor underneath which you cannot fall and it be okay with God. Just that idea in and of itself is, I mean, that we might take it for granted now in the 21st century,
But
but it was not taken for granted then. It
no,
wasn't even taken for granted in the 16th century,
N-
15th, 14th, 12th,
no,
4th.
it was
Good grief.
revolutionary, because there's certainly, especially at the time, the civilizations that were nearby,
Yeah.
that was not in their mindset, that people had any sort of inherent dignity. And over again, when God says this, he says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. Like, I cared for you when you were oppressed. And I tell you now, this is what you're going to do. And I think it's pretty telling.
I think so too. I mean, lots more to say about the fact Deuteronomy requires witnesses in order to convict somebody of a crime. You have to have multiple witnesses. Lots to say about the fact that the people of Canaan aren't just worshiping gods other than the God of Israel. They're performing ritual actions like child sacrifice, which the people of Israel have discerned has nothing to do with God's actual intentions.
Or selling their children to be temple prostitutes.
Right. I mean, so there's, there's a lot about the Deuteronomistic society that's trying to uphold human dignity and to create a civilization that honors it, as opposed to other nations. But for the sake of time, we probably better move into Joshua. So Deuteronomy ends with God burying Moses. Personally, I do love that. No human being buries Moses.
I know.
God buries
Isn't
Moses.
that so sweet?
It is really sweet. And I can't help but think that it's a beautiful concession here on God's part to bury Moses himself, since he can't permit him to go into the promised land. Yeah.
Yes. So then we get to Joshua. Now Joshua is tough, whether you guys have started reading him or not. So before Moses dies, he says, Joshua is going to be the person that's following up after me. And everyone's like, yeah, great, we'll follow Joshua. We're super excited about that. And then they get these instructions. Go into the promised land, right? This land that I've promised you, and wipe it out.
Yeah. Every man, woman, child. Yep. Destroy it.
Destroy all the cities, everything. Or
the English Standard Version uses a translation that says devote it to destruction, because the Hebrew verb there for destroy is it's also like a ritual term. It like refers to the sort of action that you're performing when you perform a burnt sacrifice. You're destroying the thing and giving it to God at the same time. And it's as though this is like,
that's what you need to do with all these towns.
Yeah. Like they're
And
being
these people.
I mean, it's a pretty gruesome.
It is.
It's a pretty gruesome idea. It's legible within the story because the author of this history thinks that the Canaanites are wicked. So this is like God is saying you've got to wipe them out as a sacrifice in order to consecrate the land, and then you're going to dwell in it and be holy. And then, of course, they aren't.
Are not,
which is important to remember that even within the worldview of this biblical author, Joshua's conquest doesn't end up actually working. Yeah, they conquer the land, they inhabit it, they build a civilization, and then they will subsequently misbehave, and then they will lose it. They will suffer the exact same fate as the Canaanites do over and over and over again.
Being, what would you say it was?
Devoted to destruction.
Devoted to destruction. That's what Babylonians do to them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. The Babylonians devote the people of Israel to destruction. Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
We're going to get to the prophets later on, who basically say, many of them say exactly that.
They do. They do.
Yeah. The Babylonians end up being the instrument of God's punishment.
They do.
In the same way that Israel is an instrument of God's punishment to the Canaanites. Gosh, this theology of retribution, the circle just goes
It just keeps going and keeps going. I think one of the things that we need to note, though, we could talk some more about whether or not this is actually what's going on in Joshua, whether or not God is really commanding them to blot out every single man, woman, and child.
Yeah, maybe this is just a voice in Joshua's head.
Right.
Maybe the voice isn't God.
Right. And there are some reasons to doubt it at times, but there's also a few other things that happen in the narrative that show that this is not what actually happens, right?
Yeah.
So
They don't actually wipe everybody out.
they don't actually wipe everybody out.
Not even on the level of the text. We're not even talking about history.
No, we're
We're
not even
talking
talking
about
about,
the
we're
text.
talking about even in the text, they don't.
Yeah.
And there's a few different reasons why they don't, depending on what it is. One is Rahab, who is a prostitute, who hides some of their spies who go in to check out Jericho. And they promise to spare her and her entire family, basically everybody she can fit inside her room, that they will be safe. And they are. They just let them kind of go away, right? And that's it's her. I mean, it's her and her brothers and her father. It's quite a few people that are sort of allowed. And then there's a little bit later on,
It would also be her descendants.
her
right?
descendants. Yes,
So that means that her people,
They just lived
native Canaan, are going to be
living in that area
living within the nation of Israel forever.
forever,
Yeah.
forever. And they do. I think they say something along the lines of, and they still live among us, or something like that.
Yeah,
And
they still live among us.
they
to
still
this
live
day.
among us to this day, which means all the generations were allowed to stay, right? Then there's also was it the
The
Gibeon?
Gibeonites, yeah.
Gibeonites.
Yeah, the Gibeonites trick Joshua into making a treaty with them, and so they don't get destroyed, even though he probably would have wanted to destroy them.
Yeah. Which I actually find that one
Totally.
quite funny.
I love that Joshua doesn't. I mean, Joshua's not perfect. He's not even a perfect military commander.
No, he
Um,
doesn't, even think like, hey, God, cool. Like, he doesn't check in on that one at all.
No, it does. Yeah, it says that they did not consult the Lord after the Gibeonites come to them and asked
They
them
like,
for a
we got
treaty.
this ourselves. We got this. And then they realized they were outsmarted.
Oh my gosh.
Not surprising. Even other places in the text, right? Even when it's saying wipe everybody else out, it also says times later, don't marry these people, right? And so in the same way as it's saying, wipe everyone, kill everyone, we know they're not doing that because it's also commanding these people don't marry them, which means there are still people around that they haven't killed off every single Canaanite.
Yeah. Wow. That is absolutely true. That's absolutely true. So the conquest couldn't have been
Successful in the way it's hard to say the word successful, but
right.
it did not accomplish what it set out to accomplish in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Which
Because
is like this ritual genocide of a whole
area,
region.
right?
That's not actually what plays out on the level of the story.
No.
And it's very, very unlikely to have been what played out in history.
Correct.
I mean, historians debate whether or not there was an actual conquest or whether or not the people of Israel basically emerged from out of some of these Canaanite tribes or whether there was like a more peaceful sort of assimilation process. And the truth is it's possible it was all three of those things.
It could be a little bit of all of it.
It's possible that they did emerge out of the Canaanites. It's possible that there was some conquering that went on, much like what you see in Joshua. And it's also possible that there was some treaties and that there was some peaceful assimilation and that kind of thing, like what happens with the Gibeonites on the level of the text.
Absolutely.
I mean, the conquest as described just in the story of Joshua doesn't destroy all the property and doesn't destroy all the people.
It doesn't.
It's much less destructive than meets the eye if you just pay attention to
if you
kill
just
every
start
man, woman,
reading,
and child stuff.
yes. The more you read through it, the more, or there's lots of places where they say, and this, this tribe of Israel, they didn't kill all the people there, so all these people live with them now. And this tribe over here didn't kill everybody, lived among them, so all those people lived with them too. So it was much less destructive. Now, there is the remaining question, though, which is, did God really command them to do this?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly don't know the answer to that question. Certainly not at this point in my rereading of the Bible. And I would want to leave the question open. And it's much more comfortable to have a ready answer to the question, to either say, yes, definitely God told Israel to conquer in exactly this way, or to say, God did not tell the people of Israel to conquer in this way. This was just a voice inside of Joshua's head, and it was a false voice. It was not actually the voice of God. God doesn't tell people to do this kind of thing. God doesn't condone it, etc. And I think that just sit for a little while in the tension between both of those possibilities, that maybe they got it wrong and it was just a voice inside of their head, or maybe there were good, if mysterious reasons why it was better for this civilization to occupy this land. I don't know. I mean, we're getting into like conversation about, is war ever just? And I think the only thing that I have time to say today is that I don't know whether or not this war was just. What I know is that war happens and that the history of the human species is full of war, enmity, violence, nation rising up against nation, people against people, and that
Mm-hmm.
there's a little clue left in Joshua. Just like I was saying, you can
Mm-hmm.
see the theology of retribution in Deuteronomy collapsing under the weight of the history of its people.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can see the theology, the straightforward theology that this conquest is a holy war endorsed by God in Joshua collapsing under its own weight, collapsing under the pressure of the true revelation of the fullness of who God really is. And it's in chapter 5. It's
Mm-hmm.
before
Yeah.
the fall of Jericho.
Where they've started taking over any part of the.
They haven't conquered anything yet. It's right before the first conquest of a city state
Mm-hmm.
in the region of Canaan. When Joshua was by Jericho, Joshua lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And the man said, "No, no, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. And then, of course, God goes ahead of the
Mm-hmm.
armies of Israel, as God has said that he would, and prepares Jericho to fall, and Jericho falls,
Mm-hmm.
and the people go in, and so on and so forth. But it's really stunning that when Joshua asks the commander of the Lord's army, that army that is going ahead of them spiritually and invisibly and making their conquest possible, they think, when he asks that commander, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" The commander says, "No."
Yeah.
You
This.
would expect him to say, "Yes, I'm for you."
Yeah.
That's the whole theology of the book of Joshua. But instead, he just says, "No,
Yeah. My translation says neither.
neither,
Neither. Like no,
neither."
really, not either one.
Maybe for God's own mysterious providential reasons, God worked through this struggle and confusion to accomplish his purposes on earth.
Mm.
But you cannot actually say that God was on the side of Joshua and Israel as opposed to, Jericho. Maybe it's not that straightforward. Maybe it's just a mess
Mm.
and God is working through it to make the mess incrementally better
Mm.
until we get the perfect consummation of his kingdom and his will is done on earth as it is in heaven, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think it is interesting also that this angel of the Lord, Joshua falls on his face and says, "What do you command me?" And the only thing he's commanded to do is worship. Take off your sandals. This is a holy place. And that's the only thing that we get that's his command, right? Because after this, it's like a different narrative. But that's like the one command that he has. So I wonder about that.
This is a God who, for much of the book of Joshua, is being depicted rather like a war god, like the Roman god Mars. But this particular exchange is
Mhm.
not something a god like Mars would ever say.
No,
This is,
no.
and this I
Where's the
think
glory in that? Where's the winning the battles in taking off your sandals?
that's right. The fact that this God is bigger than all of this, transcends all of it, is still the Lord of history. Um, but it's just bigger than all of this. By degrees, I think, becoming more and more a part of the surface level of the biblical
Mm,
text.
mm.
And until it's fully on the surface, we're just going to have to sit in the tension of, well, did Joshua hear God correctly? Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the one thing that we can say for certain in our reading of the Bible so far is that God, for God's mysterious reasons, decided to love these crazy people and stick by them over and over. And at the end of Deuteronomy, at the end of Joshua, they have sort of another renewal of the covenant where the
Mm.
people promised to be loyal to God and they aren't. Surprise, surprise. But God says, "I still remain loyal to you,"
Yeah.
again and again. That's the one thing that we can say for sure in these texts. God has chosen these people and is ever faithful in that.
Well put. As we move into Judges, we're going to see that conquering is way easier than governing.
Than governing, yes, yes.
Things are going to go off the rails very quickly. And
Almost immediately.
how
Oh,
many of us are surprised? No one. With that, we'll see you next time. Please like, share, click, subscribe. Help us to share the good news of the God of the Bible with a world in desperate need of him. We pray that he might work through all our struggle and confusion to accomplish his purposes on earth. Till next time, take care.
bye.